Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things giallo, here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through giallo cinema is the second film from Luciano Ercoli, Death Walks on High Heels, released in 1971. In this video, I will do a deep dive overview, then segue into a full review and GialliTally. The overview will be spoiler-free, the review and GialliTally will not. Here is Death Walks on High Heels. Overview. Death Walks on High Heels is an Italian and Spanish co-production released on November 19th, 1971. The film is directed by Luciano Ercoli, written by Ernesto Gastaldi Manahén Valasco. Music is composed by Stelvio Cipriani. The cast is comprised of Frank Wolff as Dr. Robert Matthews, Nieves Navarro, billed as Susan Scott, as Nicole Rochard, Simón Andreu as Michel Urmont, Carlo Gentili as Inspector Baxter, Jorge Rigaud as Captain Lenny, Luciano Rossi as Hallery, and José Manuel Martín as Smith. The plot follows Nicole Rochard, an exotic dancer working in Paris, who becomes a suspect to the police after her father's recent murder, a notorious jewel thief. Things get worse for Nicole when a masked man using a voice changer breaks in and threatens her over the stolen diamonds, leading the woman to believe that Michel, her alcoholic boyfriend, is the culprit. She flees to the English countryside with Dr. Robert Matthews, one of her wealthy admirers at work, who promises Nicole a new life together. But she cannot truly escape the past, which begins to rear its ugly head. Hot off the heels of the successful debut film, Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, 1970, the team of director Luciano Ercoli, writer Ernesto Gastaldi, and actors Nieves Navarro and Simón Andreu assembled once more for Ercoli's sophomore giallo outing. The film they brought us has garnered mostly a mixed reception, with nearly all agreeing the film is worth seeing at least once. Death Walks on High Heels was shot on location across Italy, France, and England, which adds a distinct European flavor to its aesthetic. Director Luciano Ercoli made use of striking real-world locations, including the vibrant streets of Paris and the quieter, picturesque landscapes of the English countryside. These settings lend a contrasting atmosphere to the film, with the urban, neon-lit sequences complementing the seedier and more suspenseful elements of the plot, while the rural scenes provide a false sense of tranquility and safety. Ercoli's decision to shoot in these settings was influenced by the desire to evoke a cosmopolitan, jet-set aesthetic that was popular in giallo films of the era. The climactic scenes, shot in a remote part of the English countryside, proved especially difficult due to unpredictable weather. Several key outdoor sequences had to be rescheduled or reworked due to rain and poor lighting conditions. Despite these setbacks, Ercoli and Fernando Arribas managed to capture some stunning visuals, utilizing the misty, overcast backdrop to heighten the film's eerie and suspenseful atmosphere. Behind the scenes, Nieves Navarro and Luciano Ercoli's personal relationship played a significant role in the film's production, and Navarro, billed as Susan Scott, was Ercoli's muse. This dynamic is apparent in the way Ercoli frames his star, often lingering on her with a certain affection, making her the focal point of many sequences. While some viewers may appreciate this focus, it's likely a response to her more secondary role in Forbidden Photos, where Dagmar Lassander took the spotlight. Here, Navarro is given ample screen time, showcasing her allure as a key element of the film's eroticism, which compensates for the minimal gore and violence. However, a controversial moment arises with Navarro performing a dance number in blackface and a fake afro, a scene that has not aged well and remains problematic by today's standards. The production faced several challenges, particularly in coordinating shoots across multiple countries. Language barriers and differing filmmaking practices between the Italian and Spanish crews led to logistical issues. Additionally, Frank Wolff, who played Dr. Robert Matthews, was reportedly unhappy with the direction of the script, leading to some tension on set. Wolff's discontent may have influenced his performance, adding an extra layer of detachment and unease to his portrayal of the mysterious doctor, a fitting nuance for the character, even if unintended. Upon its release, Death Walks on High Heels did not garner the same level of acclaim as some of its contemporaries in the giallo genre. It received mixed reviews, particularly for its convoluted plot and pacing issues. Critics at the time pointed out that while the film had moments of genuine suspense and style, it often fell short due to its overly complex narrative, which made it difficult for audiences to follow. Despite this, the movie has developed a cult following over the years, especially among giallo enthusiasts who appreciate its distinctive visual style and the performances of its lead actors. The film's mixed reception can largely be attributed to the screenplay, which falls short of Gastaldi's usual standards. It comes off as inconsistent, often feeling overly convoluted in an attempt to mislead the audience. Ercoli's direction doesn't quite help to streamline the narrative either. Critics noted that while the film delivered on the visual and erotic elements typical of the giallo genre, it fell short in terms of narrative cohesion. Over time, the film has been re-evaluated more positively, particularly in the context of the giallo genre's broader history. Modern fans appreciate the stylish cinematography, Cipriani's memorable score, and the film's blend of eroticism and psychological thrills. It is now seen as a unique, albeit flawed, example of early 1970s giallo, capturing the transitional period of the genre as it shifted towards more explicit and lurid content. The plot of the film becomes fairly predictable as it progresses, despite the writers and directors' efforts to keep viewers guessing. However, the frequent appearances of the masked killer inject just enough suspense to maintain interest, even if the final twist is somewhat telegraphed. Overall, this is often seen as Ercoli's weakest giallo entry. On the bright side, the film is visually striking, as I've said, thanks to Fernando Arribas' cinematography, which delivers stunning, quintessentially 1970s imagery. The iconic J&B whiskey makes frequent appearances, adding to the film's classic giallo aesthetic, while Stelvio Cipriani's score perfectly complements the atmosphere. Stelvio Cipriani, already well-versed in composing for giallo films, would go on to be considered one of the genre's most influential composers, ranking alongside the greats. Born in Rome in 1937, Cipriani studied music and initially worked as a backup musician for various popular singers. His first major composing job came with the score for the spaghetti western film The Bounty Killer, 1966. He then crafted the music for Piero Schivazappa's S&M thriller The Frightened Woman, 1969. However, his big break was scoring Enrico Maria Salerno's The Anonymous Venetian, 1970, a drama featuring giallo veterans Tony Massante and Florinda Bolkan. The success of this score propelled his career, giving him opportunities across multiple film genres. Cipriani's giallo credits include The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, Bay of Blood, and The Devil Has Seven Faces, all released in 1971, as well as What Have They Done to Your Daughters, 1974. For me, one of the most memorable contributions includes the film The Blood-Stained Shadow, 1978, as well as Rabid Dogs, 1974. The latter, not a giallo, but a crime thriller with a twist that I find particularly inspiring in cinema. The film's cast delivers solid performances overall, with Frank Wolff delivering a compelling performance as Dr. Robert Matthews, balancing charm with an undercurrent of menace. Navarro herself does a fine job here, though she shines more in Ercoli's next giallo, Death Walks at Midnight. Navarro's portrayal of Nicole showcases her versatility and charisma, cementing her status as a genre icon. Simón Andreu is effective as ever in his typical role as a shady, morally ambiguous character, although his frequent casting in similar roles might feel repetitive to some viewers. Argentinian actor Jorge Rigaud returns to giallo cinema here, lending a dignified presence to his role as Captain Lenny. Born in 1905, Rigaud began his film career in the early 1930s and continued acting well into the 1950s. And by the 1960s and 70s, he had become a familiar face in both Spanish and Italian cinema. His notable roles include the spy thriller Kiss Kiss, Bang Bang, 1966, the spaghetti western Sugar Cult, 1967, the heist film Grand Slam, 1968, and the horror classic Horror Express, 1972. Rigaud made his giallo debut in Lucio Fulci's Perversion Story, 1969, later appearing in Fulci's A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, 1971, The Case of the Bloody Iris, 1972, and Eyeball, 1975. Tragically, he passed away in 1984 due to injuries sustained from a traffic accident. While Death Walks on High Heels initially struggled to find an audience outside of Europe, it was eventually released on VHS in the 1980s, albeit in a poorly cropped and low-quality version that did little justice to Arribas' cinematography. It wasn't until the film was restored and released on DVD and Blu-ray decades later that it gained a new appreciation from genre fans. The restored editions highlighted the film's visual flair and Cipriani's evocative score, helping it find a place in the giallo canon. Today, it is included in several giallo box sets and retrospectives, often serving as an introduction to Ercoli's directorial work. In retrospect, Death Walks on High Heels stands as an intriguing entry in the giallo genre, offering a mix of suspense, eroticism, and style. While it may not be the most coherent or tightly plotted film, its visual appeal, strong performances, and Cipriani's atmospheric score make it a noteworthy watch for fans of Italian thrillers. It may not have reached the iconic status of Ercoli's debut film or later films like Death Walks at Midnight, but it remains a fascinating artifact of early 1970s genre filmmaking, blending the allure of European glamour with the dark intrigue of giallo cinema. Overall, while Death Walks on High Heels may not be considered a masterpiece, it remains a notable entry in the giallo genre, especially for fans of Lucio Ercoli's unique directorial style and the screen presence of Nieves Navarro. But I digress. On to the review. Spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't yet seen the film. You've been warned. My prediction for the movie's GialliTally score. This giallo I regard as being fairly tame. Not too many kills or instances of nudity, a few flashbacks. As for the staples themselves, I don't anticipate catching a whole lot. So I'll say 400 to 450 points. Well, let's begin the GialliTally and review portion of the video, beginning as always with the previewing cliches. The repeat offenders are 1 point for actor, 3 for writer, 3 for composer, and 5 for director. Frank Wolff was in The Cold Eyes of Fear and Death Occurred Last Night, 2 points. Nieves Navarro was in The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion and Naked Violence, 2 points. Simón Andreu was in The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, 1 point. Jorge Rigaud was in A Lizard in a Woman's Skin and Perversion Story, 2 points. Osvaldo Genazzani, though uncredited in this film, was in The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, 1 point. Ernesto Gastaldi wrote The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, Human Cobras, The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, So Sweet, So Perverse, The Sweet Body of Deborah, The Story for A for Assassin, Libido, and, though uncredited, The Possessed, 27 points. Manahén Valasco wrote The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, 3 points. Stelvio Cipriani composed for Bay of Blood, The Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, and Human Cobras, 9 points. And Luciano Ercoli directed The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, 5 points. Cliché points for the title. Death Walks on High Heels contains the word death, 5 points, and is a declaration. Death walks on high heels. Oh, does it now? 5 points. First look, 25 points for the Italian director, and an additional 15 points for the movie releasing during the golden age of giallo cinema. I'm not going to say that this giallo is a quintessential one. And would you look at that? It is plot o'clock. Close the windows and turn up the heat. We have us a cold open, 5 points. G is for gloves, 5 points. While on a train, we find a man in one of the rooms, with a gun haphazardly holstered, sporting an eye patch. After the man freshens up, he stows his gun under his pillow. There's a knock at the door, followed by a request to check passports. We cut to our man getting his throat cut. K is for knives. Extra points for the knife getting bloodied, 10 points. Extra points for G is for gloves, for black gloves. 5 more points. E is for eyeballs. 5 points. The killer is hidden behind a balaclava with the most brilliantly colored blue eyes. They ransack the dead man's room, ignoring the pistol, and seem surprised by what they cannot find among the luggage. Title card, Foreign Locales, Paris, 5 points. Urban Locales, 2 points. Art featured, statues, architecture, 5 points. During this opening credit sequence, we follow this young couple as they are taxied around Paris. This is Nicole and Michel. Necking, 5 points. The couple are now being interviewed by authorities, the woman reminding them that she sleeps during the day and works all night. The commissar has some qualms with her boyfriend, stating that he knows Michel's association with criminals. The commissar comes out with it. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of diamonds were recently stolen from a vault here in Paris, and Nicole's father, a notorious safecracker, was found murdered on a train to Switzerland. Nicole defies this, stating her father gave that life up long ago. The commissar warns Nicole that the killer was clearly after the diamonds, so if her father hid them with her, she will likely be a target next, but she denies having them. She adds that she's hardly seen him recently, and last saw him months before his death. The commissar gives out one final warning to Nicole. Michel states that if there's nothing else, then they'll be off. F is for fashion to Michel's suede suit. 5 points. Later at the club, Nicole is told she has a call. N is for nudity. 5 points. On the other line seems to be the killer, who mentions needing to meet with Nicole. T is for telephone, extra points for the killer making a call. 10 points. Nicole taunts the caller, telling him to come to the club if he likes, and hangs up. Hopefully you're not easily offended because we cut to Nicole's stage act, where she is in blackface and a fake afro. Z is for zoom. 5 points. X is for xenophobia, 5 points. As a warning, scenes like this I have to censor because YouTube will demonetize me for having sexually charged material. Honestly, you're not missing much though. In the audience is an older gentleman who seems very infatuated with Nicole. The dance goes on for a long while. The man asks a server if Nicole would join him at his table, but he doubts it, as she's performing elsewhere tonight. The routine ends with Nicole dancing topless. Gratuitous 1970s dancing, extra if naked. 5 points. After the show, Michel meets Nicole in her dressing room.
I like you when you're all blacked up.
For anybody who doubted me giving X's for xenophobia moments ago. He applies lotion but puts the moves on instead. The two begin to get hot and heavy, but are interrupted. Outside now, Michel asks how much longer they must be forced to only meet up between shows. She tells him essentially that it must go on this way because between the two of them, she's the sole breadwinner. This doesn't go over well with Michel. Nicole runs to catch the taxi waiting for her, saying that she'll see Michel at home later, and warns him not to get drunk. At the next club, we find the same gentleman from before. After the act, Nicole is surprised by the man who waits for her in her dressing room. He's an admirer. As she changes in front of him, she explains how this is simply her work. He states that he will see her at the next show and leaves. A few moments later, the telephone rings. The same voice from before threatens Nicole. They demand to know where the diamonds are, but Nicole claims that she knows nothing. Extra points for Z is for zoom, for a zoom on eyes. 5 points. Later, Nicole is walking home as another feminine figure begins to follow her. Nicole picks up speed, as does the pursuer. Foot chase. 5 points. Nicole is caught by a woman imploring her for a light. Nicole arrives home, pours a drink, and is startled by a knife thrown at her which sticks in the wall. Michel is drunk. He's clearly jealous, and he taunts her about earning all this money just so he can drink it away. Michel's insecurities bubble up as he proclaims that people are calling him a pimp. He asserts that he can get by without Nicole earning the money and storms out. Once alone, Nicole grabs something from the medicine cabinet and returns. J is for J&B, 5 points. An assailant clad in all black sneaks in through the window. Nicole pulls her boots off and relaxes. The figure withdraws a straight razor and attacks. The two struggle for dominance. Nicole produces a switchblade, which is knocked from her grasp. The man rips her clothes off. She sees his blue eyes. He subdues Nicole on the bed and, using a voice changer, threatens her with disfigurement if she doesn't comply. He demands to know where the diamonds are, but Nicole claims ignorance. Extra points for Z is for zoom, for a zoom on a weapon. 5 more points. He drags the blunt end of the razor across Nicole's body, having mentioned that she wouldn't feel it cutting her. After some time, he releases Nicole, warning her she'd better have a clue or else he'll use the sharp end next time. Nicole tries in vain to find Michel, but only runs into her admirer. O is for obsession, 5 points. He introduces himself as Robert Matthews and mentions the hotel where he is staying, but Nicole takes off. She returns home and finds Michelle there waiting for her in bed. Nicole tells him about her encounter, but he assumes that she's had a nightmare. She insists it's true that the masked man wants the diamonds, but she doesn't know where they are. Michelle quips that even if she did know, she'd never tell him. He regains himself and apologizes for earlier, for his drinking, for his insecurities, and for everything. He loves her. The two get romantic. Cut to the morning. As Nicole freshens up, she finds something in the sink. 2 blue-colored contacts. Nicole flees at once. Nicole arrives at the Ambassador Hotel where she runs into Robert. He asks her out to lunch, stating he has a flight later to London, but Nicole insists that he take her away from Paris as fast as he can. Airplane. Extra if character is seen on the plane. 5 points. They arrive in England. We are treated to a montage of them out and about London. Nicole gets some new boots. At a restaurant, Nicole points out how Robert doesn't ask many questions of her. He retorts that replies usually disappoint him, so he gave up asking questions. Then Nicole reminds him that he fell for a striptease artist. He explains that he had led a boring life with a boring wife, but he's decided to enjoy life now. His wife, Vanessa, refuses a divorce, likely because her money paid for his clinic. Exposition dumping, 2 points. Nicole continues to make a point that Robert does not know her at all. She disrobes into her delicates and teases Robert to take her boots off, but he likes them. So she gets naked sans boots. Yo, Luciano Ercoli, we get it. You have a boot fetish. Cut to Michelle questioning the doorman about Nicole's whereabouts and the admirer who swept her away. He learns that the man was staying at the Hotel Ambassador. Q is for questions, 5 points. Back with Nicole, Robert explains to her that his cottage is nearby. Vanessa doesn't know about it, and they will meet the caretaker, Hallery, at the local pub. He warns Nicole that Hallery has a fake hand, which he is sensitive about. Lastly, that these village folk like to gossip, so she should pretend to be his wife. Inside, we meet Hallery, who holds a cat. Animals featured, pet cat, 2 points. The patrons as well as the barmaid are all speechlessly gawking at Nicole. Hallery offers to take them up to the cottage. At the cottage, which is on the coast, we discover that Robert also has this little boat, which he mentions is too small to fish, and he must implore Captain Lenny about a bigger one. A fishmonger, Philip, passes by. Robert buys the 2 freshest fish and puts them on his tab. The 2 eat their fish dinner by candlelight, and I gotta say, the film is trying really hard to make this scene sexy, but it is just not doing it for me. Fishy fingers, fishy breath, and cigarette breath, no thanks. Look at how she grabs this towel. Suggestive much? Also, you're gonna need a lot more than water to remove that smell of fish. We cut to Robert finally taking those boots off as Nicole begs him not to leave her alone all night. Robert assures Nicole to call Hallery if there are any problems, but she confesses that he scares her most of all. Robert shows Nicole Chekhov's gun hidden in this secret compartment upon the mantle, instructing her to use it if the need should arise. Imagine if this never came up again. Robert leaves. The next day, Nicole passes the barmaid, Peggy. Hallery watches Nicole as she goes. Cut to Nicole doing her toes as Hallery starts a fire. He watches her with that Torgo look in his eyes. She catches him staring a tad too long and dismisses him. That night, someone sets up a telescope outside the cottage and observes Nicole as she disrobes and gets into bed. V is for voyeur, 5 points. We cut again to Nicole lounging outside the next day. Robert arrives and passes Philip once again. Nicole calls forth Robert, who romantically carries her off. Cut to them in bed. I is for infidelity, 5 points. He is married after all. Robert organizes a meeting at the pub with Captain Lenny. Captain Lenny spies the 2 sitting in the pub and walks inside. He's arrived with photos for a new boat. Robert requests they sit across the room to avoid the gawking villagers engaged with gossip, who mention that the 2 make love with the curtains open. Nicole notices them whispering about her and Robert. Suddenly, she hears the robotic voice of the killer, but it is only a pastor using a voice box while on the telephone. P is for priest, 5 points. As the 2 men discuss the particulars of the boat, Nicole speaks up, requesting to be taken home. She exits, followed by Robert. In the car, Nicole is despondent, only asking again to be taken home. They leave, as the camera lingers on the man of the cloth exiting the pub. At home, Nicole pleads for Robert to take her back with him to London, but he implores her to remain at the cottage. He reveals his plans to ask Vanessa for a divorce and to remarry Nicole. Robert leaves for the night, promising to return promptly tomorrow. He mentions performing an operation in the future on a man who's recently lost his sight. The voyeur from the previous night watches as Robert leaves, and eventually watches another figure approach the front door. Nicole sees who is at the door and lets them in. She sits as the stranger procures cash in hand. The money is handed off. The stranger leaves. Nicole puts the cash away in a box and goes to sleep. The next morning, Hallery meets Dr. Matthews as he arrives. Robert isn't staying long, so he says, mainly in town to speak with Captain Lenny once more.
I'll get the luggage.
Inside the cottage, Nicole is nowhere to be seen. Robert looks all over for her, but to no avail. He questions Hallery, who denies seeing her ever leave.
I don't know about it. I just don't know.
Later at the pub, Robert sits with Captain Lenny, who confronts him with the fact that Nicole was not his wife. He says the village is too small for such secrets, and people talk. The theory implied here is that Nicole ran off with another man. Robert doesn't believe it, and orders Captain Lenny to telephone his clinic in London at first sign of Nicole. Dr. Robert Matthews is with his patient, Smith, who recently has become blind. B is for blind, 5 points. Smith still cannot see, but Dr. Matthews reassures him that after the operation, his vision will return to him. Robert seems to remove a lens or a layer of film from Smith's eyes, then informs him not to remove his bandages. A feminine figure passes by the windows and enters the room. Robert sees the same boots he had bought for Nicole before he is shot by a handgun. The perp runs out, Robert collapses, and Smith staggers over to check on him before ringing for help. Cut to Robert in a life-saving operation. We pan up to these two detectives of Scotland Yard, Inspector Baxter and Bergson. A woman is waiting. A prolonged silence consumes the room. Robert is carted out, repeating, "Nicole, Nicole." The woman informs the detectives that her name is Vanessa, and she knows not who Nicole is. Inspector Baxter is told by the surgeon that Robert was very fortunate that the bullet missed all of his vitals. Smith tells the detectives that he'd heard a woman in heels at the crime scene, but states that it is just as likely that it could have been a man wearing women's shoes. He says the killer entered with a determined pace, fired, then fled. Smith confirms that he's been a patient to Dr. Matthews for some time, but denies having ever heard the doctor mention a Nicole. W is for witness, 5 points. Cut to the body of Nicole being pulled out from the bay onto a fishing vessel. Extra points for I is for infidelity, for murder or blackmail occurring after the fact. 5 more points. At the cottage, Inspector Baxter finds the bejeweled boots of Nicole, as well as whatever this thing is. He is called over, where he listens to playback from an audio recording device. 5 points. It seems to be just foreplay of Robert and Nicole. Another detective finds something pressing within the film reel, which Baxter says to remind him of later. Bergson drags in a heavily intoxicated Michel. They found him at the local pub, causing a scene. Baxter forces him to drink concentrated lemon juice, then slaps the piss out of him for good measure. Michel is taken to a window where he vomits out onto a constable standing guard. Across the bay, Michel sees Captain Lenny observing him. Peggy tells Inspector Baxter that Michel arrived yesterday, speaking French, drinking, and always making phone calls. He'd passed out, but in the morning, he became hysterical when he learned that Nicole had been discovered drowned. A is for alibi, extra points for the alibi getting investigated, 10 points. I say this because they do substantiate this alibi. Bergson and Michel return. Michel claims that Robert murdered his woman, Nicole, that he had stolen her away from him in Paris. Baxter refutes this accusation, stating the doctor was shot and wounded last night. He then accuses Michel of having been to this cottage before, which he denies, admitting only that he knew this was Robert's house. Michel claims he was given the address from Nicole, who had telephoned him to come at once. Baxter tells Michel that Nicole's body will be examined in London, but he speculates that she may have ended things due to no signs of murder being found on her body. Michel rejects this theory. Baxter then takes Michel's passport, informing him that he's not allowed to leave the country until they can prove his innocence, but Michel proclaims that he's not going anywhere until he finds Nicole's killer. Extra points for X's for xenophobia, for the main character being a foreigner. You can give this to Nicole or to Michel. 5 more points. Bergson presumes the obvious. Michel followed them here and killed Nicole, but Baxter points out that why would Michel remain in town getting pissed all night? We cut then to Captain Lenny, who is ambushed by Michel, threatening to toss the man off the cliff unless he receives some answers. Inspector Baxter tells Bergson that there's most certainly a connection between the murder and attempted murder. Bergson calls back Michelle, who we see has been interrogating Lenny this whole time. What Lenny's told him is anybody's guess. Hallery has this look on his face as the detectives peel out. They drop off Michelle at his hotel, he promises to not flee, and Baxter informs Michelle how he can contact Scotland Yard. Cut to Robert in hospital, being shown the footage he'd filmed in Paris of Nicole. Robert laments if he'd never introduced himself, then maybe Nicole would still be alive. He tells Baxter that he didn't know that she was with somebody. It never came up. Baxter relates to Robert that Nicole had contacted Michelle and had told him the address, and that Michelle himself has an alibi for the other night. Baxter interrogates Dr. Robert Matthews. The latter asserts that he and Nicole were fine when he'd last seen her, but Baxter counters that Nicole had vanished the day after, and later on, Robert was nearly killed by an assailant who was reported to be a woman in heels most likely. Robert confesses he didn't see his shooter, he only saw the boots. Baxter argues that the two had quarreled. Nicole then shot Robert, and fearing the worst, stricken with grief, had plunged herself into the brackish sea. He adds that the weapon was a French pistol. Vanessa is now being questioned by Michelle. She insults Nicole, prompting Michelle to throttle her. He accuses her of being seen at the cottage, but she denies this. Michelle claims that a woman was seen arriving at the cottage one night. A constable comes to the rescue. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is throttled, 5 points. Woman is choked, 6 points. And a woman is saved by a man, 10 points. Y is for yelling, extra points for a hysterical woman yelling, 10 points. And extra points for Q is for questions being yelled, 5 more points. Michelle is brought before Inspector Baxter, who warns him to let Scotland Yard handle the investigation, but Michelle asserts that the killer will surely get away then. Bergson asks Michelle who had told him about the woman seen approaching the cottage, and he relays that it was a man claiming to be a former Navy captain. Baxter informs Bergson to telephone Vanessa Matthews and invite her to picnic. Captain Lenny is meeting with the detectives and Vanessa, and he dutifully answers that Vanessa is not the woman he had seen at the cottage that night. Next, they arrive outside the cottage. Baxter wonders whether the shooter knew that Dr. Matthews' patient was blind and was counting on it, thus presuming the blind fellow would provide a convenient testimony of what he heard. Vanessa offers the possibility of Nicole shooting Robert, as Hallery just stands ominously in the background. Baxter calls out Vanessa for knowing how to open the awkward gate, which he himself has struggled with the past few days. In a flashback, we see Vanessa's sequence of the events according to her. Vanessa came to the front door and told Nicole to let her in, before stating who she was. Once invited in, Vanessa bribed Nicole to leave Robert alone, stating that he is not wealthy. She is. She offered £5,000, which Nicole laughed off. Regardless, Vanessa tossed her the money. Vanessa tells them that she knew once Nicole was paid that she would leave Robert alone. Inspector Baxter wants further answers, declaring that it's still likely that Michelle found out details about Robert from the hotel registry and could have conspired with Vanessa for both the spurned lovers to get revenge on their adulterous partners. Baxter knows it is a preposterous theory, but he's only supposing. Vanessa returns home into the loving arms of her adulterer of a husband. She explains where she's been and what she now knows. Vanessa goes on to tell Robert how she had bribed his mistress to leave him for good, but he doesn't believe her. In the end, Robert is sorry, and the two are happy to have each other. All seems forgiven and forgotten. Later that night, Robert goes to sleep and Vanessa sits up. The assailant shows up outside the cottage and spies upon Vanessa. He slips into the house and hides behind the mirror. Vanessa realizes the window is open, locks it shut, and fixes herself in the mirror. For hiding behind the mirror, I am going to award mirror being used beyond its natural purpose. 2 points. I mean, how else do you use a mirror beyond its natural purpose other than that? The intruder locks the bedroom door. Close up on a door handle or lock. 5 points. The killer springs the trap. Vanessa falls onto the bed and is carved up. Mutilation of breasts. 10 points. The killer flees as the maid, Liz, rushes to the bedroom and peers into the keyhole to discover Vanessa butchered on the bed. Robert grabs her from behind. We cut to the detectives in the bedroom. Baxter notes that Robert seems to be a wreck right now. Upon the body, they discover blue-colored contact lenses. The evidence is taken to the lab right away. Robert is being seen to. Baxter speaks with Liz, who relays the events the other day when Michelle had attacked Mrs. Matthews, and adds that he was at the house days prior and conversed with Nicole for a few hours. Bergson mentions how Baxter apparently was onto something with his earlier theory. They insist the doctor carry out an autopsy as soon as possible, which unfortunately he cannot do for about a day. Bergson reminds this constable to find out if Michelle wore contacts. M is for morgue, 5 points. The next day in the morgue, the pathologist confirms what he suspected, that he'd be unable to help identify the killer. Baxter brings up Nicole, who died during a time frame where Michelle could not have committed the murder. He says when her body was pulled from the water, rigor mortis was barely setting in, which suggests less than 6 hours since death. Baxter points out how Vanessa's body here has been dead over 24 hours, and she likewise has no rigor mortis, but the pathologist attributes the process being retarded by her being kept in refrigeration. Baxter repeats this fact of being kept on ice aloud. Odd clue, 5 points. Bergson flirts with Peggy, promising to take her out later. Captain Lenny is grabbed by Michelle. The detectives question a local iceman who informs them that they only sell to restaurants and fishermen, and no one has privately purchased any ice in the past week. Hallery then relays to Baxter that there is a second wharf on the opposite side of the house. The other wharf, located in a secluded stretch of rocky beach, has a cleat with a rope feeding into the sea. Bergson, still confused by Baxter's suspicions, aids him in pulling up the rope. They withdraw an anchor at the end of the line. Baxter has an idea and begins fitting the knotted loops over Bergson's body. Hallery spies the two detectives. Baxter asserts that the slack from the loops would have nicely fit blocks of ice to a body, which Bergson completes the theory as ice being used to halt the process of rigor mortis. Someone is observing the detectives using a spyglass. We see Baxter forget how to open the gate despite having been here numerous times these past few days. The watcher is revealed to be Michelle. He has Captain Lenny tied up. Michelle accuses him of having spied upon Nicole. Next, Michelle finds the sum of money and again accuses Lenny of stealing the money after the murder. Captain Lenny confesses to seeing a man dressed in black, but obscured by the heavy rain. He then draws a pistol and attempts to shoot Michelle. Bang! The detectives hear the gunshot. Michelle seizes the gun, then notices the lawmen running up. As they run in, Michelle squeezes out the window and escapes. Bergson calls out to him to stop, but he tells them, "Va te faire foutre," then escapes with their car. Captain Lenny confesses to spying on Nicole undressing at night because she never drew the curtains, a fact set up earlier in the film. He recounts how she'd lie around half naked, gyrating her body. He just couldn't resist. One night he saw her stash a large sum of money in a box. This same night she seemed upset. He then spied a man peering in from outside her window. He saw the man smother Nicole, but the weather made Lenny's spyglass fog up. He saw the man carry Nicole's body out, then return and search for something. The killer went to the closet and retrieved a pair of women's boots. He lost sight of the killer, but managed to see him escape. Lastly, Lenny confesses to stealing the money. He cannot testify for certain who the man was, although he admits it could have been the Frenchman. Captain Lenny is then handcuffed. Extra points for V is for voyeur, for the voyeur becoming a witness. 5 more points. We see Smith being escorted across the street. He stops to pick up a wallet, but is apprehended by Michelle, who calls him out for not being as blind as he is letting on. Extra points for B is for blind, for Smith not actually being blind. Although we were told earlier that his vision would return soon enough. But still, 5 more points. Smith agrees to confess to Michelle what he knows. First, he says that he was blind, but his vision has been returning, although he has kept up the ruse that he's still blind. Smith objects that Michelle won't call the police, for he's as guilty. Slap! Knife! Slap! Smith says he doesn't know who shot Dr. Matthews because he was blind at that time. Slap! Smith finally reveals the truth. He lost his sight due to a bright blowtorch used while breaking into a safe, and he would have told Inspector Baxter the truth, but sincerely could not see who the shooter was. Only the footsteps, which sounded like a woman. Michelle calls Baxter from a payphone and dons a thick French accent to disguise himself, informing Baxter that he should keep an eye on Smith. Gee, I wonder who this French informant could be. Baxter, as it turns out, is not stupid and thanks Michelle for the advice. We see a flashback of Smith and a man breaking into a safe using a blowtorch. The other man is Nicole's father. A burglary alarm goes off, the men panic, and the torch grazes Smith's eyes. Extra points for E is for eyeballs being mutilated. 5 more points. With the alarm, the robbers had 3 minutes left, and so Smith fought through the pain. This story he tells to Baxter. He says he was promised by his partner that the diamonds would be hidden and he would be taken care of following the successful getaway, but his partner hadn't turned up. Smith refuses to squeal on who his partner is. Well, Bergson enters and gives a telex to Baxter, which informs him of the missing details. Smith's partner was Ernest Rochard, who was murdered on a train headed to Switzerland or Spain, depending on whether you're watching the English subtitles or the English dub. Not sure why they changed it, though. Smith asserts that he didn't shoot Dr. Matthews, and Baxter announces 3 guesses as to who the shooter could have been. Someone who wanted to kill Robert for revenge and to secure the diamonds. Bergson proclaims Nicole Rochard. Smith ponders if she truly is Ernest Rochard's daughter, then she must have the diamonds. A montage plays of the detectives telephoning Robert and then heading over. Cut to Michel arriving outside the cottage. Through the window, he sees Nicole. He bursts inside, but is blinded by a flashlight, then is slapped, but it is not Nicole. It is a man. It is Hallery. Punch! 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 Slap! Smack! Crash! Punch! Michel grabs the fireplace poker. Miss! Smack! Backhand! Backhand! The police break it up. Hallery apologizes to Robert, confessing it is a vice of his.
The master would not approve.
Queer character? Cross-dresser? 5 points. Don't look too into that. Hallery is taken into custody. Michel is frisked and a hanky is taken from him. Baxter opens the hanky and reveals its contents, which are a set of blue-colored contacts. Michel makes a run for it. Punch! Judo chop! Smith finds that weird thing which I couldn't identify from earlier, which he recalls Ernest Rochard as telling him that he'd hide the diamonds in his daughter's choker and bracelets. Oh, so that's what that is. Case closed. On the way out, Baxter tells it all to Robert Matthews. Michel must have found Nicole, killed her, and had her body on ice to give him an alibi against the pathologist. Then he must have killed Vanessa Matthews and tried to kill Smith, but missed the shot. He must have worn the boots as Smith had surmised. Robert expresses that he wishes to never return here. On the way out, they pass the fishmonger Philip. He says today he has the freshest fish, so Robert won't need to take blocks of ice as he did last time. What? Robert is surrounded. In a final flashback, we see Vanessa spilling the beans to Nicole that Robert and Nicole's father were business partners for years. Robert, the brains who planned the robberies, and her father, the brawn who executed them. Robert murdered her father to get to the diamonds. Robert hears Vanessa say this while he's standing outside the window. Robert confesses to the murders and goes on to say that he agreed to help Smith in order to see if he knew anything, knowing that Smith did not know that he was the mastermind. We watch as Robert smothers Nicole with a pillow. He wrapped her body with the ice and threw her into the sea. He then returned to search for the diamonds, but Michel had broken in and was taking the boots. Robert says they were identical to a pair he'd previously bought for his wife. He admits that he has a kink for his women wearing such boots. He decided then and there to leave and come back after Nicole was discovered, but his wife showed up and tried to shoot him dead, but fumbled the job, which gave him an even tighter alibi. He knew it was her from the boots. Robert had to kill his wife or else she'd have blackmailed him for the rest of his life. He says he's hidden the real diamonds and the ones they have are fakes. He hid the real jewels in the mantle. Oh no. Chekhov's gun! Robert commands the men to handcuff themselves to the mantle so he can escape with the jewels. Michel tries to jump Robert, but fails. Dr. Matthews then slips out the back. He shoots a constable and runs for it. Michel gives chase and tackles him. Robert breaks away, breaks past Philip, and tries to get in the car. The two struggle again. Punch! Punch! Smack! Crash! Katoosh! Pow! Wham! Slap! Slap! Katoosh! Knife! Philip runs to get help. Bam! Scram! More struggle. Judo chop! Slap! 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 Rock? The men stop Michel. At the airport, Baxter apologizes to Michel for assuming it was him when he'd found the contacts. Michel says that when he found them in the sink in Paris, he realized Nicole was telling the truth and that they were planted there to make him appear guilty. Michel boards his plane and heads back to France. The detectives congratulate themselves on a job well done and give us the strangest look to each other as we freeze on the end credits. Quickly, let's add up some final cliches. L is for lies. Extra points for a character lying about an alibi. 10 points. Extra points for O is for obsession, for the sleuth being obsessed. Another 5 points. S is for secrets. Extra points for the killer having an impossible to predict motivation. 10 points. I mean, did you really guess that Robert was a mastermind in the robberies? U is for undercover. 5 points. Mistaken identity of the killer. 5 points. Killer's identity is hidden due to the framing and editing, 2 points. First person POV, 5 points. Hidden identity of the killer until the final moments, 5 points. Evidence seen being destroyed or hidden may include a body, 5 points. And betrayal by the killer or the accomplice is killed, 5 points. And that's Death Walks on High Heels. So I'm going to go off the cusp here. I enjoy this movie. It does have a lot going on in the plot, and it's not one of the better Ernesto Gastaldi scripts, but I honestly don't really have a problem with it. And I guess I would say it's ambitious. Like, a lot of the stuff going on, it kind of all needs to work. It's one of those things where this happens because the plot says so. But I find it to be a very enjoyable movie. The mystery is fairly good. Did I see it coming when I first saw the movie? I don't remember. I think I was. I remember being satisfied because I think I did assume that Frank Wolff's character was the killer. I mean, when you listen back, the killer, even though he's using a voice changer, he's got a British accent. And there's not many English characters that it could be. In fact, like, how is it going to be, someone like Hallory or Captain Lenny or, it's obviously it's not going to be Vanessa. And so the only character it really can be is either Robert Matthews or Michelle. And it doesn't seem in any way to be Michelle, but there's a lot of misdirection in the movie. So, like, the scenes with the spyglass in the flashbacks, you can tell that that's Michelle going through the house, but you don't see him ever, like, actually committing the murder, so it never really goes full that way. But there's a lot of stuff in the flashbacks and whatnot that you can tell who the actor is who's doing that bit. But ultimately, I do like this movie. Do I like it more than Luciano Ercoli's other films? I remember enjoying this more than Death Walks at Midnight. Now, I haven't rewatched Death Walks at Midnight since I first watched it, but I watched Death Walks on High Heels and Death Walks at Midnight in like relatively a span of a few nights. And I remember liking Death Walks on High Heels more. Between Death Walks on High Heels and Forbidden Photos, I think I enjoy Death Walks on High Heels more. It might be my favorite Luciano Ercoli movie, but again, I kind of have to rewatch Death Walks at Midnight to really assess that. But I like this movie. It's, like I said, it's not perfect. Let's segue to the GialliTally cliches for this movie. Post-giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killing. Greed and gain. 5 points. The reason for the investigation. Well, beyond the police investigators, we have revenge or obsession due to losing someone to the killer. 10 points. And, while we're at it, extra points for an amateur sleuth. 5 points. Bonus points. The style bonus. The film's style creeps up on you. There is quite a lot. Zooms, focus racking out, colored lights, numerous different optical effects, including the recurring telescopic effect, which doubles as a POV, and some mirror shots. The film looks very giallo. Out of a maximum of 25 points possible, I'll give Death Walks on High Heels 17 points for its style bonus. Soundtrack.
If you don't talk, I'll kill you.
Yes, 15 points. Bad effects? I think the effects are really good. I forgot how graphically violent the mutilation is, so no points. Final look, extra points. The Deadpool, tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus. We have 10 points per kill or death scene for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we haven't added yet, plus the knife kill bonus. We have Ernest Rochard, impaled with a knife, 21 points. Nicole Rochard, smothered. I'll give this plus 1 point, so 11 points. Vanessa Matthews, impaled with a knife, 21 points. And this constable. We don't have confirmation of this as a kill, but upon review, this looks like they were going for a kill here. Gunshot, 10 points. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen. I'll give 3 points for each. We have none. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. We have Michel Aumont, Robert Matthews, Vanessa Matthews, Hallery, Captain Lenny, Nicole Rochard, and I guess Smith? 35 points for red herrings. Flashback sequences, 5 points each. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 40 points for flashbacks. Nudity. I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia. We have breasts, breasts, ass and breasts, ass, breasts, ass and breasts, ass, and ass. 60 points for nudity. Ladies and gentlemen, for Death Walks on High Heels, I awarded the film an AZ score of 22 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 190 points. And for the full GialliTally score, I award Death Walks on High Heels a GialliTally score of 663 points, compared to Short Night of Glass Dolls in first with 968 points, The Case of the Bloody Iris in second with 830 points, and Slaughter Hotel in third with 827 points. Death Walks on High Heels is actually in 10th place behind The Blood-Stained Butterfly. I predicted around 450 points, and I obviously did not remember a lot from this movie when I saw it a year or two ago, and forgot how many cliches the film uses. But like I say, these points do not mean a movie is better or worse. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comment section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Subscribe to The King in Giallo Patreon to see early access to the YouTube videos, exclusive video series, and to generally support what I do. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the Forgotten Giallo film series, episode 21, 1971, part 5. And then we have the best Giallo films of 1971 and recap. Thank you very much for your continued support, and a special thank you to those who support me on Patreon. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
To the health of your ass!
Stop it, I've heard enough.